Here we are in the webinar about how to prepare a proposal for Horizon Europe, an innovation procurement proposal. Let's have a look at the agenda. First, we will go through some logistics aspects. Then we will look at innovation procurement. Why is it important for Horizon Europe? How are the rules of the game, the funding conditions? How does evaluation and submission work? And at the end, there will be room for question and answers, which you can already introduce in the Slido link. So if we go to the next slide, we can have a look at all the practical issues. First, we'd like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded. So if you want to watch again some parts later, you can always go back to the website of the event page and you will find both the recording and the slides over there. In case you experience a connection problem during the webinar, just go back to the event page and refresh it, and you will be able to see again the YouTube live stream. You can post all your questions on the Slido link. The link is also on the event page. If you see that somebody else has already introduced the same question that you wanted to ask, don't post the same question again, but you can upvote the question that you also wanted to ask so that it will appear higher up in the list of questions. During the webinar, there will be also some instant polls to see a bit where our audience is coming from, what are their opinions on certain topics, and you will always be able to see the results live on your screen. Okay, then let's start the first part of the webinar. Morten, I give the floor to you.
Thank you for that, Lieve. And just to make sure, while I have you here, Lieve, are you seeing the full presentation now, or are you seeing the one where you can also see the next slide?
I'm seeing the full presentation.
That's good. Okay, perfect. But then I think the technique is working on at least my side. Good afternoon to all the participants. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, where we are going to talk about innovation procurement, which is indeed a cross-cutting topic that is quite important for our new framework program, Horizon Europe. And as many of you have probably seen, we just published a lot of calls this week on the funding and tenders portal, and I can only encourage you to go and have a look at the different opportunities we have currently on the portal with our open calls, forthcoming calls, and read the work programs. And in some of these work programs, you will actually also find the two types of actions that Lieve will present a bit later to you. The public and innovation procurement actions. So my role today is simply to give you an overview of why innovation procurement is important for the research and innovation program we're dealing with here, Horizon Europe, and to give you a bit of the policy background. I can say that I am from DG Research and Innovation. Lieve is from DG CNECT. So just changing slides here. Yes, okay. So I just mentioned that this will all be about Horizon Europe, the European Union's research and innovation program. And typically we have research and innovation programs starting by supporting the first exploratory phases of research through what we could call push policies. So they encourage the supply sides, here researchers and companies, to invest in the development of new innovations and to push them to the market. The supply side uses then marketing techniques to make noise about its innovations in order to find potential customers. And from the moment that the potential application areas are identified for the innovations, it's possible also to use pull policies. So here it's the demand side that uses purchasing power to work as a magnet to pull innovations to the market. So the potential customers use procurement budgets to trigger the supply side to bring these innovations to the market in order to fill specific customer needs or to address wider societal challenges. And innovation procurements happens thus when public procurement is used to drive innovation from the demand side, and this can have benefit both from this demand side but also from the supply side. If we look at it, the key benefits also here on the slide, for the demand side, it may enable the public sector to steer the development and the adoption of innovation solutions to their needs, which can also help improve the quality and efficiency of public services and to address wider societal challenges as such. There's also several benefits from the supply side, as you can also see here on the slide. They can use procurement budgets to open up concrete business opportunities for suppliers. The cooperation with potential customers can speed up the time to market for innovations. And the fact that customers are interested in innovation attracts also financial investors for the companies, which help to scale up their businesses. And then finally, these investments can help to create new high quality jobs and create a European technological leadership in emerging fields. But I think I already talked too long. Let's do one of these first polls that Lieve just presented during the introduction to get an idea where you are coming from, where you are in this spectrum of stakeholders. So are you attending the webinar because you're interested in the innovation procurement from the supply side or from the demand side? Please use the poll. It's open now. And I suppose that you can also see where the things that are coming in now. And we'll just keep it open for a while because there's some delay in you adding your reply and the system actually taking note of it. Okay, so we have, I think, a stable, more or less stable view of who you are now. At least I have 75 of you who have answered now, 80 almost. I can see that most of you, at least 1/3, are coming from supporting organizations. So that could be that you are NCPs, that you're working in the research support units or in competence centers. But there's also quite a number of participants, both from the supply side and from the demand side. And I think this is quite good news in terms of the way that we have structured our presentation to you, because we have information both for those supporting participants, but also for those who will actually be on the both demand and supply side. Okay, I think, Olivier, we can deactivate or close the poll now. I think we have almost 100 people that have answered, and I will take back control, right? So thanks a lot for replying to this question. And we'll continue by taking a closer look at why innovation procurement is so important for Europe and for the European Union. So public procurement spending represents 17% of the GDP in Europe when you count in all types of public buyers, so the classical public authorities, the utilities, and the defense sector. Public procurement investment therefore have a really big impact on what we could call the healthiness of the European Union's economy. And as innovation procurement is a driver for the public sector modernization as well as for industrial competitiveness, it is really vital for the economic growth in the Union. But we could also compare ourselves to other parts of the world by looking at how much Europe is really leveraging innovation procurement to drive forward economic growth compared to, for instance, Asia and the United States. So if we just take a recent study, a benchmarking study, we see that innovation procurement investments in Europe are 10% of the total public procurement investment. This is twice as low as the US and South Korea, who every year invest respectively 20 and 25% of their total public procurement in research, in innovation procurement. So underinvestment is really biggest when we look at the procurements in research and development. Europe only invests 0.5% of its total procurement in R&D procurement. If we look at the US and South Korea again, they invest respectively 3% and 5%. So Europe is we could say underusing public procurement to prepare itself for challenges of the future. And the average European public procurement investment in the adoption of digital solutions are also 3 times less than leading economies. So we could conclude that there is a clear need to mainstream innovation procurement across Europe to strengthen Europe's competitiveness and to boost the economic recovery, while also increasing the resilience in the supply chain and reinforcing EU's strategic autonomy. Many of you have probably seen this visualization of Horizon Europe, actually also Euratom and the European Defense Fund before. And this is just to highlight that innovation procurement is a topic of cost-cutting importance for all the pillars and related programs of Horizon Europe. And this is really because all innovations need first customers. So if we look at the Horizon Europe, we see that under the excellence science pillar, innovation procurement can help increase EU's global scientific competitiveness in the field of research infrastructures. In the field of supercomputing, for instance, innovation procurement actions have already been financed under the 7th framework program, FP7, and the latest framework program, Horizon 2020. And they have already paved the way for a stronger European cooperation and competitiveness through the joint undertaking for high performance computing, the Euro HPC, in which the member states and the European Commission are investing more than 1 billion euros in joint procurement cooperation between 2019 and 2026. Under the global challenges and European industrial competitiveness pillar, innovation procurement can trigger new research and development and deployment also of innovative solutions to address societal challenges inside health sector, security, climate change, energy, environment, transport, you name it. It can also reinforce Europe's technological and industrial capacities. And also in the Horizon Europe novelty, the EU missions, innovation procurement can play a key role to bring to the market solutions that can tackle big problems. For instance, several innovation procurements funded under the previous framework programs have successfully commercialized solutions that are already today helping EU countries to tackle the corona crisis. And then under the 3rd pillar, the Innovative Europe, innovation procurement links to support SMEs via the European Innovation Council. For instance, several startup and SMEs that have participated in EU-funded innovation procurements have already obtained additional grants or venture funding from the EIC, the European Innovation Council, to grow their business and market their products to wider markets. And finally, if we look at the European Defense Fund, we also see that innovation procurement is central, and it is actually also foreseen in the legal base to support pre-commercial procurement. And it may also be used in the Euratom program. But let's do a second poll to get a better idea in which application you have the most interest to participate in innovation procurements. What is your main field of activity, your main field of interest within the Horizon Europe program family? So please tick one of the 9 options that corresponds the best to your field of activity or interest. And the poll should be open now. And I see that already a lot of people have started to add their area of interest or their activities. Okay, so if we take stock now, probably half of the participants have replied. We saw that digital industry and space had a very successful start in this poll, but was quickly overtaken by health. But I indeed see that the results are changing almost all the time. But we see now with almost 100 participants having submitted their reply, that health is between 1/4 and 1/3 of the participants' main area of interest or activity. I think it makes good sense, and I can also tell you that in the health cluster in Pillar 2, there are already included some actions for innovation procurement. But we also see indeed that the digital industry and space, so cluster 4 within Pillar 2, also have attracted quite a number of participants today, whereas climate, energy, and mobility, together with food and bioeconomy, represents about 1/4 together. So thanks again. We have now reached 100 participants. I think that's a good number to close the poll with. But it's really good to see that we have participants from all the areas, and I'm very sure that Lieve will take over now and explain you more about the details, explain you more about how we then actually support innovation procurement in Horizon Europe, and provide you with some tips and tricks for your application. Lieve, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Morten. Let me share again the screen then for the next slide set. Okay, I hope you can all see the slide set now for the next part of the session, where we will talk about the rules of the game, the funding conditions, in fact, for the innovation procurement actions. A third poll is coming up. I promise you it's the last one, but it's important for us to know, to see what kind of detail we should explain in the next slides. Let's have a look at whether you're already familiar with the innovation procurement support in the EU's research and innovation programs from the previous programs, or whether you have just heard about it but not participated yet, or whether no, it is really the very first time that you hear about it and you need still to catch all the possible information and details. Let's open this poll now. Interesting to see again how the bars are shifting all the time. It seems that there is a mix of participants of all the three possible types. There are people who have already experienced it firsthand, people who have heard about it but not done these innovation procurements themselves yet in our program, and also new people who need still all the information from scratch. Okay, that's very good to know, because then I know what to pay attention to in the next slides. Okay, I think we can close the poll and continue with the presentation then. So let's have a look at innovation procurement support in Horizon Europe. First of all, let's have a look at what's happening when a public buyer realizes that, I need to address a public need, but it's not possible to do it with an existing solution. In many of the cases, he realizes that, there are already solutions that are almost on the market or already on the market, even in small quantity, but they don't meet exactly at all my procurement needs to use them really in large scale. But if the demand side would clearly express what they really need, their requirements, and there would be enough demand for these solutions, then industry would be able to provide them. And there is in fact no need to procure any research and development anymore because the solutions are already so close or on the market. What is actually needed is scaling up of the production facilities or adapting maybe some solutions, tweaking them a bit to the last requirements or integrating them with the existing systems. So in this case, the public sector can just use its normal public procurement procedures and act as an early adopter for the new solutions that are about to arrive or arriving on the market, but not widely used yet. What does it mean, an early adopter? We consider all the first 20 buyers on the market for a new innovative solution to be early adopters. So as long as an innovative solution has not been deployed to more than 20% of the buyers on the market yet, we still consider in our calls these procurements to be procurements of innovative solutions, or PPIs abbreviated. So what does the public sector then do? It prepares its procurement, informs the market, of course, in advance that it wants to buy something innovative so that the suppliers can get ready. And then by expressing this demand for a critical mass of innovative solutions, he triggers them to get ready to bring the solutions to the market with the desired price and quality within a specific time so that he can buy them when he starts the call for tender. So this preparatory work to inform the market in advance is done through what is called a market consultation. And we publish those in the Horizon program on the TED portal in the official journal, using the notices there, the procurement notices, the prior information notices. After the time to prepare is over, maybe the procurer first wants to test whether the solutions really meet his needs. Maybe he needs certified solutions before he can buy them. Maybe he needs to label them, for example, to put energy or environmental labels on them to know which level of energy efficiency or environmental compliance the different solutions of the different providers have. And when all that's done, he will buy then the significant amount of solutions that is needed. But there are also cases where the public buyer realizes, what I need to buy is not at all even being close to the market, being prepared, almost ready. No, there is still significant research and development needed if I want to get new solutions needed, developed for my procurement need. There is still de-risking of technology needed. There are different potential suppliers telling me that I should use different solution approaches. None of them is really validated yet, and I don't know which one would work best. And it's still too risky to commit to go for one solution or the other, or to commit even to go for large-scale deployment, because I don't know even yet whether it will work. None of it is validated yet. I cannot define the budget yet for large-scale deployment or the final requirements, because we haven't even developed and tested these solutions, and we don't know what are the boundaries of what they're capable of. So it happens also sometimes in these cases that the procurers want to attract new players to the market if they find themselves in a situation of supplier lock-in, for example. So what does the procurer do then? He buys research and development to steer the development to its procurement needs and to collect information about what different alternative solutions are really able to do, so that when he afterwards needs to deploy the solutions, he will have also a competitive supply base that is able to deliver solutions according to his needs. So what is pre-commercial procurement? Ultimately, it's buying of research and development, giving a chance to several suppliers in parallel to develop and show to the customer what their solutions are able to do. And possibly it can also even include the purchase of a limited amount of solutions already during the pre-commercial procurement. So the different solutions are actually evaluated after different milestones are reached, for example, solution design, prototyping, testing. And another characteristic of pre-commercial procurement, in order to boost the commercialization of solutions and get better value for money for the procurers, is that the risks and benefits, in particular the intellectual property rights, are shared between suppliers and procurers so that everybody benefits the most. How does this look like then in reality? A pre-commercial procurement that you see on the left starts with multiple suppliers getting an R&D contract for one phase, and only those that still meet the requirements at the end of the milestone of the evaluation go to the next phase, and so on, until solutions are really tested, compared, validated, and it is all clear what different vendors are able to do and what not. And then the procurer can decide to launch a procurement of innovative solutions to widely deploy them. Interesting is that because of this way of working, because we split the R&D procurement from the large-scale deployment procurement, that the pre-commercial procurements fall outside of the international government procurement agreement with the WTO and outside of the European public procurement directives, which means that we can use some clauses to steer economic growth in Europe in these procurements. If you're interested to look at examples, more than 600 public buyers around Europe have already implemented pre-commercial procurements and procurements of innovative solutions as well, of course, but those you will know better, as those are the typical procurement procedures always used under the procurement directives and national procurement law. So what are the additional consequences of having both pre-commercial procurement and procurement of innovative solution tools? Is that we can use them separate, of course. We can use procurement of innovative solutions when there is totally no R&D needed, but for example, service innovation or process innovation. It has also been shown in the US, for example, that by splitting these two, you can get 20% better value from money products in the end, because there's more competition until the last large-scale deployment contract. It also enables to use a small budget pre-commercial procurement to de-risk a much larger development and deployment procurement, afterwards. So you can totally reshape your procurement need, your tender specifications for the PPI procurement, taking into account the benefits of the lessons learned from the pre-commercial procurement. If you realize, for example, that there are negative side effects, if you use one specific requirement during the pre-commercial procurement, you can delete that requirement and put another one when you go for large-scale deployment contracts. If you would combine everything in one procurement contract, you wouldn't be able to make such big changes to the requirements during the procurement. And because the PCP falls outside of the international rules, we can create conditions, like I said, to make sure that research and development happens in Europe, that products are sourced from Europe, for example, that commercialization afterwards happens in Europe, etc. All kinds of conditions to create growth and jobs in Europe. And it also makes it possible for suppliers that are doing their research through other mechanisms, for example, through grants, through their own company funding, funding from financial investors or from other procurements. It makes it also possible for them that have not participated in pre-commercial procurements to still bid for procurements of the innovative solutions afterwards. And one final benefit is that it helps the smaller players on the market. When we split off the R&D procurement from the large deployment contracts, it's easier for small companies to make offers because the contract size is much smaller. The tasks are not as demanding. The required manpower is smaller, and the financial guarantee requirements, the professional guarantee requirements in the pre-commercial procurement are also much lower than in deployment contracts. What is the EU doing on innovation procurements? Not just Horizon Europe funding, but all kinds of other things as well to strengthen the policy framework. If you want to see what's happening in your country on innovation procurement, you can have a look, for example, at the benchmarking. We're supporting also implementation, practical issues. We're having a network of national competence centers, for example, around Europe. We're providing also European assistance for innovation procurement for buyers who are not in the Horizon Europe program, but just want to do an innovation procurement on their own. There is guidance, examples. Finally, the Commission is also doing innovation procurements itself. If you want to have a look at how the Commission does a pre-commercial procurement, have a look at our EU blockchain PCP. We have done some procurements of innovative solutions as well, for example, during the Corona crisis to help hospitals buy disinfection robots. And we're doing also joint procurement with member states. And then finally, there are the EU funding programs. Today we talk about Horizon Europe, but there are also lots of other programs supporting innovation procurement that you can have a look at later. Here is an overview of all these different programs. We won't go into detail, but on the website you will find all of them. Examples. Enough theory. What is this innovation procurement really about? Here you see some examples where procurers from member states have done pre-commercial procurements on their own without any EU funding. And then finally, the scaling up of the solutions has been helped later through other projects that were funded by the EU. For example, in Norway, the government funded pre-commercial procurements to develop the first and largest carbon capture, storage and transport facility in the world that is now being widely deployed with European funding. And this thing will enable to reduce by 40% all CO2 emissions across the entire EU over the coming years. So the potential impact, that's what I want to say here, of doing really forward-looking procurements, because this procurement was started more than 10 years ago, in fact, before all the work about the Green Deal started. But now that it is there, it can bring a major contribution to making Europe a CO2 neutral place. The one on the right is the example that I mentioned before during the Corona crisis. A group of Danish hospitals started already many years before the Corona crisis in 2016, if I remember well, to look for solutions that can disinfect hospitals, that can stop the spreading of viruses and bacteria. And they got new solutions developed, robotic solutions, in a pre-commercial procurement. One company, a startup that was created specifically for this procurement, grew into a really big company when afterwards, of course, the Corona crisis started and everybody wanted disinfection material. Again, a European procurement has helped to spread these solutions more widely across Europe and help the diffusion of this. Here you see some results of EU-funded pre-commercial procurements from the past program, and you see that they are really delivering what we were mentioning that could be the potential benefits of such procurements. They are really opening the route to the market for small new players. Of course, they're helping also bigger market players. They're stimulating cross-border growth also, much more contracts awarded cross-border than typically in public procurement, and they're creating growth and jobs in Europe. Almost all the R&D is done in Europe. Only the parts that are impossible to do in Europe are done outside Europe. Longer term impacts, we start to see that as well from the PCPs that have already been finished for a number of years. We see that the contractors who made it to the very last phase, the testing and validation phase, almost all of them successfully commercialize their solutions. They grow their business indeed, revenue growth, finding financial investors, making partnerships with other companies. Some have even gone on the stock market or done mergers or acquisitions. Here you see an overview of all the potential benefits, also in terms of export and so on. And finally, some examples of European funded projects that have also had large-scale effect on deployment and on the benefits for the public buyers. We see that in our projects, 2 years after the projects, more than half of the projects, the procurers in the projects also deploy their solutions. More than half of the solutions help to improve interoperability. They remove also supplier lock-in. And yes, they improve strategic autonomy. Several vendors that have come out of these projects are now also leading suppliers in other parts of the world. For example, on robotics, we have some companies that developed systems to strengthen the muscles of people that have, for example, after a healthcare problem, difficulties using their muscles, or that in the private sector need to do heavy lifting of materials inside big factories, for example. Exoskeleton systems were developed to strengthen their muscles, and they've been sold worldwide by this company, this small startup, PE Servo, which went on to NASDAQ, grow their business, found investors, and so on. Morten already mentioned the example on the right with supercomputing, that where innovation procurements paved the way for a big joint undertaking to do more joint procurement in the future. What were the lessons learned, feedback that we got from the buyers in all these projects? They want more calls, more synchronized calls also. If we do preparatory coordination actions to do afterwards, also procurement calls and so on. They want flexibility in the way projects are implemented, and they want also more guidance. We have created for Horizon 2020 templates for tender documents. They want even more guidance in these tender documents. Feedback from companies is, don't make big changes to the instruments. It's great to have a PCP instrument and a PPI instrument. Don't mix that up. Keep it also as transparent and competitive as it is. Companies really like that we're publishing all the open market consultations and the call for tenders of all the EU-funded PCPs and PPIs on the web so that they can all participate. And they're also asking to help SMEs and startups to get faster access to additional equity and grant funding from the EIC, for example. A common feedback both from suppliers and procurers was try to simplify and accelerate the projects without changing the core features of the instruments. They asked, for example, can we not combine in the pre-commercial procurements phase 2 and phase 3 together in one phase? Make it more visible that it's possible to deployment already inside the pre-commercial procurement. And do more capacity building, like with this webinar, to inform procurers and companies around Europe. So what have we done to make all of these lessons learned really happen in the new Horizon Europe program? We still have actions like we had in the last program, but we have tried to improve them. The coordination and support actions still provide 100% funding, but they cannot fund research and innovation activities, and they cannot fund the price of an actual procurement. What they actually fund are coordination and support activities to prepare, for example, an upcoming innovation procurement. Then there are also actions who really are going to now have as a primary aim to fund pre-commercial procurements or procurements of innovative solutions that are implemented by a number of buyers from different countries in cooperation. Those are called the PCP and the PPI actions. Since it's the main aim to do this type of procurements in these projects, the procurement cost will be there more than half of the total budget of the action at least. The funding rates are new compared to the previous program. They have been increased. The funding rates for PCP actions are now 100%, the same as in the other research and innovation actions. And for the PPI actions, they are 50%. So what do these actions fund? They really co-finance the actual procurement cost and related activities to prepare, manage, and follow up the procurement. When it's a PCP action, we fund always one joint pre-commercial procurement per action. When it's a procurement of innovative solutions actions, it can be either one joint procurement or several separate procurements, but that are coordinated because they're all trying to solve a similar challenge, but in different countries. There can also be among the other related activities that are linked to the procurement but are a bit in a wider context, trying to remove barriers for introducing the solutions on the market. For example, contribution to standardization or certification, labeling, testing of solutions, preparing another follow-up procurement, doing training, awareness raising, and so on. Then there are also other actions that may not have as a primary aim to support a PCP or a PPI procurement, but that may involve the implementation of such a procurement in any case. For example, the classical research and innovation actions, they can also co-finance a PCP or PPI procurement, but then this will be under the subcontracting costs of the action. Whereas in the PCP and PPI actions, there is a specific new cost category called the PCP PPI procurement cost. So it's just a different way of filling it in the budget table, but essentially they can co-finance also the preparation, implementation of a procurement and the actual procurement cost. Of course, when you want to do something like that in a normal research and innovation action, it needs to fit with the scope of the action. If the action is, for example, only calling for exploratory research, you cannot come with a project that will only do deployment there, right? And the other way around. So you really need to read the call conditions, stopping conditions to know whether it's making sense to do a PCP or a PPI in such actions. It's not possible if the call requires industry or the supply side to be part of the consortia. Then it's not possible to do PCP or PPI procurement under such actions. Why? For several reasons, but one of them is that in an action, the beneficiaries cannot do subcontracting to other beneficiaries. So if the procurers are in the action and the suppliers are in the action, the procurers cannot subcontract anything to the suppliers. That's why they should be outside of the action, also to avoid conflict of interests in the definition and evaluation of the procurement, of course. In this type of actions, the main aim is not to foster cross-border procurements. The main aim is to foster research and innovation. So if a PCP or PPI is happening in such actions, it can be implemented by either one procurer or by a group of procurers. It can be that the call requires a group of procurers, or it can be that it leaves it open to one procurer also. In such calls for research and innovation actions, it is possible that the topic itself is calling for this, but it's also possible for participants to propose themselves to do a PCP or a PPI in any PCP or PPI action that is suitable for it. But since it's not the main aim of those actions to fund the procurement, but the main aim is that research and innovation is done by beneficiaries themselves, normally these subcontracting costs or the procurement costs for the PCP or the PPI will only be a limited part of the action. That's the big difference also with the PCP and PPI actions, where the procurement cost is a big part of the action. And finally, it's also possible that you see in the work program PCP or PPI procurements popping up that are implemented by the European Commission itself or by the funding body that is managing the program. So it is possible that the European Commission implements those procurements on its own behalf or together with buyers from member states or countries associated to the program. For example, like we are already doing in the Horizon 2020 program, the European blockchain pre-commercial procurement that is implemented by the European Commission to improve the European blockchain service infrastructure that the Commission is managing. Here you see an overview of all the applicable rules and guidance. Everything that I'm going to say today, you can find it back there, even in more detail sometimes. If you want to start reading from the general annexes of the work program. There's a specific part there for the conditions for PCP and PPI actions. and all other actions that support pre-commercial procurement or a procurement of innovative solutions or the preparation of such procurements. More detailed information can be found on the specific legal provisions in the model grant agreement and in the annotated model grant agreement about all these different cost categories, where you should enter the procurement cost, and about the specific rules for how to implement those procurements. As I mentioned, we have made also model tender documents. You can have a look at those. They still need to be updated for Horizon Europe, but the ones from Horizon 2020 are already pretty close to what it will be. Frequently asked questions after this webinar, we will collect all of them and post them also. And there are also specific application forms. In the past, this was called the proposal templates for PCP and PPI actions. And there is the European program guide that gives more high-level information about the policy objectives of innovation procurement and how to find your way across the program. What are the conditions for participation in PCP and PPI actions? You know, these actions that have as main objective to fund PCPs and PPI procurements. Well, like all actions in Horizon Europe, we need to have minimum 3 entities from 3 different member states or associated countries in the action. And because we want to support collaborative procurements here, we need minimum 2 public buyers from 2 different countries, member states or associated countries, one of which comes from a member state. That's really an eligibility requirement. So if you want to submit a proposal, make sure that you are compliant with this or your proposal cannot be evaluated. But in addition to this minimum requirement, there can also be additional buyers in these projects, for example, private procurers or non-governmental organizations that also need new solutions. As we already said, not potential suppliers of solutions, but there can be other types of entities in the action, experts, for example, that are assisting the buyers to prepare the procurement, to do dissemination activities, and so on. So who will we have in this type of project? We will have a buyers group, those people who are really going to provide the financial commitments to buy something. Then we will have a lead procurer, because it's a group of buyers. Somebody needs to take the lead to publish the procurement under its procurement law, or to organize a bit of cooperation, already starting from the open market consultation and then throughout the actual procurement itself. There can be other beneficiaries, like we said, that are helping the procurers in the related activities. And a new thing from Horizon Europe onwards is that the beneficiaries can also give financial support to third parties if this is allowed by the call. What does it mean, financial support to third parties? It could be used, for example, by public buyers to support the innovative companies after the procurement is finished to grow their business, or to award a prize to the best companies that finish the procurement, for example. There are also in-kind contributions possible. Sorry, I switched the 2 bullets. In-kind contributions, for example, if a fire brigade doesn't want to participate itself in the project itself as a beneficiary, but wants to make some equipment or resources available for the Ministry of Interior, who is in the project, to do testing, then that's possible as well. The only people who are really totally not in the project are the potential suppliers, the PCP or PPI providers. They do not sign any grant agreement with the Commission or the granting authority. They only need to sign the procurement agreement with the procurers. That makes the bureaucracy less for them. What kind of activities are eligible in these projects? Well, of course, in the proposal, the consortium shall clearly define what they want to buy, what challenge they want to address with the procurement. And then once they start the procurement, what is eligible, the project is divided always in 2 phases, the preparation stage and the execution stage. During the preparation stage, the beneficiaries will start to prepare their procurement, either one joint pre-commercial procurement or one joint or several coordinated procurements of innovative solutions. How do they do that? Every project consults the market through an open market consultation, asking researchers, industry, what's available on the market, what's possible, what's not possible within the time frame and the budget and so on, to verify whether the market readiness is there to meet the need. And then at the end, they will have finalized their tender specifications and their agreement on how to collaborate together. After that's done, there is a project review, and when everything is fine, they start procuring. Means they publish the contract notice, they award contracts, and they start buying either research and development services if it's a PCP, or deployment of innovative solutions if it's a PPI. In every project, at the end, the procurers also validate what was now actually delivered, the performance of what was delivered during a sufficient duration to see whether it will achieve the impacts. So make sure if you submit a proposal that you foresee sufficient time to do this kind of validation of the solutions. And there are, of course, also dissemination activities and activities to foster the exploitation of the results during the project. So basically, we have the big chunk of funding going to the PCP and PPI procurement in the middle, but we have the possibility of funding also all kinds of green activities that you see around that. That's around the preparation, follow-up, and implementation of the procurement before, during, and after it. You see that there is also pre-financing, so you don't have to fund all of this upfront yourself. There is a first pre-financing at the beginning of each project. When the review happens after the preparation stage, a second pre-financing, and then a final review with final payment at the end. So let's have a look at what the funding looks like. We mentioned already the funding rates, what kind of activities are fundable, the actual price of the procurement of the R&D services or the innovative solutions that are procured will be co-financed at 100% maximum in case of a PCP action, 50% in case of a PPI action, including the VAT on these procurement costs, if at least the beneficiaries cannot deduct these costs nationally. Also, the other additional activities surrounding the procurement will be co-financed at the same funding rate, and any possible in-kind contributions and financial support to third parties as well. There is flexibility that if the consortium receives this budget, they will always receive it with these funding rates, but they can use the funding they receive internally. They can reshuffle a bit internally to spend more money or less money on the procurement cost and more of the money on the preparatory activities or not. And then there are also funding for indirect costs. So on top of the direct costs that we just talked about, there is also 25% additional funding for indirect cost, but not on the procurement cost or on the financial support to third parties. On all the other costs, for example, to prepare, run, and the procurements, there you will receive also 25% additional indirect costs. Let's take an example of a pre-commercial procurement action. We are seeing here, for example, suppose there is a call for a 5 million euro pre-commercial procurement action. Minimum 50% of that action, so 2.5 million, has to be spent on the procurement cost, on the pre-commercial procurement, and the other 2.5 million on the other activities. But of course, it can be a different ratio, more on the procurement cost, less on the other activities, as it is needed for each specific project. You see also some examples of how previous projects have distributed this budget across the different phases of the procurement and the different amounts for suppliers, depending on how many suppliers they want to start their procurement with, of course. In a PPI action, there can be different situations because we cannot only have a joint procurement, we could also have coordinated procurements. Let's first look at a joint procurement. Let's see again the example of a 5 million euro grant. Again, half can be spent on procurement and other activities. And how does this procurement then really happen? If it's a joint procurement, really everything done jointly, the lead procurer will launch one joint call for tender. All offers will be evaluated jointly. There will be joint contract award based on common tender specifications, basically everything done jointly. And then, for example, different lots in the procurement can ensure that different amounts of solutions are delivered to the different buyers in the buyers group. But it can also be that procurers want to do coordinated procurements instead of one joint procurement. There are different ways of coordinating procurements. One is, for example, that there is still some action done by the lead procurer to set up, for example, in the beginning, a framework contract together with all the buyers to do a sort of pre-selection of all the potential vendors that all buyers will be able to buy from. And then once this framework contract is set up, the different buyers in the buyers group can launch their own specific contracts under their own national procurement law to buy the amount of solutions that they each individually need according to their own local requirements. Or it can be, in the last case at the bottom, that the lead procurer is actually not involved in setting up any procurement, but all the procurers in the buyers group are starting their own separate procurements whenever they are ready during the project, can be at different moments in time to buy the solutions that they need. In this case, the lead procurer is helping only in the preparation of the procurements and coordinating a bit the way the different procurers are cooperating in the project. Something specific also in the EU funding is the way intellectual property rights are allocated. So in PCP procurements, the rules for participation prescribe a specific way of allocating the IPR. All the beneficiaries in the project, like always in EU funded, in Horizon funded projects, these are now mainly the procurers that we are talking about, will retain the IPR that they will generate during the project in case they do some innovative activities themselves. And they will give to each other and to the other participants, including to the suppliers of the procurement, access to their background if that is needed for the procurement and for the project. The most IPR will be generated, of course, by the providers in the procurement. In the PCP providers will retain the IPR that they generate during the procurement, and the buyers will obtain license-free rights to use the results, rights to require the PCP providers to grant licenses to other suppliers that are working for the procurers, or the right to do it. The procurers can also request the right to do this licensing themselves, but it will always be under fair and reasonable conditions, meaning that the PCP providers will receive payment when this type of licensing is happening to other providers. And then there is also the possibility of the callback right. What does it mean? Suppose that the procurer finds out that one of the suppliers that participates in the pre-commercial procurement is at a certain moment in time using the results of the procurement to the detriment of the public interest, or is not commercializing the solutions after the procurement. Then the procurer will first consult the providers and ask them, why is this happening? And if there is no good explanation, they can require that the IPR is transferred back from the suppliers to the procurer so that they can ensure that it is used in a proper way. In PPI procurements, the approach to IPR is similar. The ownership of IPR should be allocated also to the party that is generating it, except if there are reasons why not to do it, and that can be justified, for example, when the party is not able to exploit the results. That's also the approach that is being recommended by the European Commission to the member states for all their public procurements, not only for innovation procurements. You can have a look at the EU IPR action plan for that. So in a nutshell, what are the main novelties in Horizon Europe? Higher funding rates, easier to do PCPs, PPIs in other types of actions also, possibility to fast track PCPs, to do it with 2 instead of 3 phases, to do deployment already inside the PCP. And there's also a possibility to start the pre-commercial procurement with, for example, only 2 suppliers instead of the minimum requirement of 3 suppliers that was there in Horizon 2020. And this is allowed in cases when there are no 3 suppliers on the European market available to do the work. There is a turn financing possibility that we mentioned, the specific way of allocating IPR that is now also generalized to other procurements. But there are also big novelties to try to improve the international level playing field. First of all these procurements need to respect the non-discrimination principles of all public procurements. So there can be no preferential treatment. All these procurements will be open to companies from the different countries that are participating in the program. So there will be no procurements limited only to companies from only one country, one region, one city, or to companies with only one specific profile like SMEs or startups. And access to bidders from third countries is based on reciprocity. This means that not all procurements will be open to bidders from third countries outside the member states and the associated countries. There can be restrictions in certain procurements, for example, security procurements, to bidders that are established in the EU or controlled even from the EU. Normally, all the notices will be published about the procurements, notices for market consultations, contract notices, contract award notices, except when it's really for very low budget PPIs below the national thresholds, and maybe for security contracts when publication is not a good idea. Place of performance conditions, we already had them in Horizon 2020 for PCPs, but now they are also possible in PPIs, for example, for security PPIs, when it's allowed by international procurement rules. And a new thing also is that there can be strategic autonomy clauses. For example, the work program could require that licensing or transfer of IPR is restricted. For example, exclusive licensing transfer outside of the EU can be forbidden in certain cases. It could require, when this is allowed by international procurement rules, to source strategic components from inside the EU and to do a minimum amount of commercialization of the solutions afterwards inside the EU. Here you see an overview of all the calls that are published at the moment, all the different areas that are calling for topics that supports PCP or PPI. 95 million of calls in the first work program, 170 in the second work program. You see calls in all types of areas: security, healthcare, transport, research infrastructures, energy, climate change, you name it. So there are lots of opportunities with the types of actions that we discussed: PCP actions, PPI actions, also research and innovation actions that involve a PCP or a PPI, like we mentioned, coordination and support actions to prepare potential future procurements. And then there is one thing there on the right at the bottom, program co-fund actions. That's another type of specific action that can support actually national programs for research and innovation that want to stimulate innovation procurement. So these will be supporting policy activities to reinforce the national ecosystem for innovation procurement. Here you see more detail about each of these calls. We're not going to go through them, but you can click on all these links, see the call deadlines and all the details. Important is also that there are topic-specific workshops and info days for some of these topics that are calling for PCP or PPI support. Already next week, some of these topic-specific workshops are happening for healthcare, research and education networks. Security is beginning of July. For research infrastructures in October, climate change also in July, and so on. We invite you also to attend the Research and Innovation Days, and the Horizon Europe Info Days, where there will be more information on all the different programs, destinations, and topics. Any questions about this, please enter them in Slido. As we said, we will all tackle them at the end of the webinar, but keep posting, please. And I should move to the next slide set to explain you more about submission and evaluation. Voila, here we are. First of all, how do you prepare a proposal? You need to find, of course, the leader, the pilot for the project, and the crew that wants to join it. Where do you find partners? On every topic page on the funding and tenders portal, there is a space there where you can post a message. I'm interested in this topic. I'm looking for partners. But there are also other fora, procurement forum, a LinkedIn group on innovation procurement. You can look into the already ongoing and completed projects from the past. You can look at who is doing innovation procurements in my country already on our website. Where are these national competence centers? They may know interested partners. For the ICT part, there is also a project called Idealist that helps people find partners for cause in the ICT work program. And there are also supporting organizations that actually can help you prepare the writing of a proposal or the structuring of the information to build a good proposal. You can see them there on the bottom. The main contacts are, of course, the national contact points, but you can also have a look with the competence centers, Idealist for the ICT, and so on. Here are some useful contacts in the different countries, email contacts that you can immediately link to. And the next question is always, okay, where do I find the budget? For pre-commercial procurements, the problem is now solved because it's 100% funded, but for the PPI actions, where do I find the other 50% for my procurement? Of course, it could be from your own procurement budgets. That's the most logical source, but it could also be that if you're a hospital, for example, that your national or regional ministry for health is interested in the project and would like to support this kind of pilot experience. Or some national programs actually have support for procurers that want to do innovation procurements. You could also go there. And some projects have also used creative ways like crowdfunding to ask, for example, the parents of the school if they wanted innovative solutions in the school, and they funded some of these activities. Amazing. If you are looking in other European programs, that's also a possibility. You can combine funding from different European programs, for example, from the ESIF program, the Structural Funds program, with funding from the Horizon Europe program, but then not for the same cost item. We'll explain that later, but one procurer in the project could, for example, ask funding from Horizon Europe and another one from the ESIF program. Always good also to have a look if there are maybe bodies interested to participate in your project that are already doing cooperative procurement, such as central purchasing bodies, for example, or international organizations that are mentioned there in the square at the bottom. How do you go about submitting a proposal? What is new in this process? Well, what's the same is that the proposals are still submitted electronically. The application form is available in PDF and in Word format. There is a part A with all the administrative details, and the part B contains the actual proposal, the content of the proposal, the topic that you want to address in the project. In part A, there are some new things, namely the size of the proposals is shorter, will have to be shorter. The page limit is now maximum 45 pages for PCP and PPI actions, which is a bit less than last time. So you have to be even more to the point. In the part A, you will also find a box that you need to tick in the PCP PPI actions to a sort of self-declaration that you are compliant with the minimum requirements for the buyers group, to have a buyers group from different countries. New in each proposal is also the gender equality plan.
Lieve, excuse me, can I interrupt you for a second? Because I thought that you were addressing the questions in Slido because we cannot see your second presentation.
Ah, you cannot see the second presentation?
No, I started sharing because I tried to follow, but
Oh, that's true. The sharing stopped. That is bizarre. Let me try it again then. Good that you mentioned this. Do you see it now?
And now we see the PowerPoint window. It's not in full screen yet.
Yeah. Okay, I will put it in full screen then. So we were just here about the part A and part B of a proposal template or an application form. And then we were saying that the page limit has been shortened, that you will need to take a self-declaration to show that you have a buyers group in the project. And new is also that each project in Horizon Europe needs to look at gender issues, and projects that have participants that are public bodies, research organizations, or higher education establishments will need to have a gender equality plan from 2022 onwards. That plan that shows that you are taking into account gender issues in your organization, not necessarily in the proposal, this specific proposal, but in your organization. How does the evaluation process work? Well, like always, we have evaluation criteria. They are the same as in the previous program, but we have streamlined them. They are shorter. The number of aspects that you need to show that you're able to take into account in your proposal has been reduced, which makes it easier to submit proposals. There are new cross-cutting topics in Horizon Europe, but not all of them need to be taken into account in PCP and PPI actions. For example, we mentioned your organization. If you're a public body, will need to show that as an organization, you're dealing with gender issues, you have a gender plan, but in the proposal of us to do a specific PCP or PPI action, you typically don't need to address gender issues, how you will deal with them in that specific procurement. Unless, of course, there are topics where this is really important, and then this will be clear in the work program. Interdisciplinary approaches in the research and open science practices are also not a mandatory evaluation criteria. But you will need to have a data management plan. You will need to know what am I going to do with all the data that is generated by the project. Will it be published? Will it not be published? And how? And new is also that in all proposals there is a do no significant harm principle. To protect the environment. In fact, proposals should not do any significant harm to the environment. So you will also need to address this at least in the proposal a bit. Ethics reviews and security scrutiny, yes, they were already there in the past, but now in the program they are there, standard in the part A, also the security review. And if you think that there are certain security issues in your proposal, then this may trigger a more in-depth security review also for projects that are not even in security goals, but that are triggering specific security issues. So please fill this in with care. If you have further questions about generic aspects of how does an evaluation procedure work, what are types of costs that I can submit and so on, there have been previous webinars already about these aspects, also about this gender dimension and other horizontal issues, about dissemination and communication and so on. So have a look at them then to find more information. We will now only look at the specificities for the PCP and PPI actions. Here are the 3 evaluation criteria and how they are formulated for the PCP and PPI actions. Under the first criterion, excellence, you need to show what are the objectives of your project, how do you want to satisfy the procurement need, what kind of ambition in the level of innovation is needed to satisfy this procurement need. And you will need to show that there is a methodology, some kind of coordinated and structured approach to run your project. Impact is, of course, very important as evaluation criteria. We want to know, of course, how will you achieve the expected outcomes and impacts that the topics in the work program are looking for. If you're applying for a topic that is looking for new solutions for climate change, of course, we would like to know what kind of impact do you think you can achieve with this procurement on mitigating climate change. And you will have to explain also a bit how you plan to achieve that. What are the concrete measures that you will put in place to achieve these outcomes and impacts? Will it be dissemination activities, specific activities to ensure wider exploitation of the solutions, and so on? In the case of the PCP and PPI actions, exploitation plan refers to the plan that the beneficiaries, the procurers are doing, the activities that they are doing to exploit the solutions after the project. So that's basically how they will make wider use of these innovations. It's not how they will commercialize the solutions, because that's done normally by the suppliers in the procurements who are not beneficiaries of the project. Quality and efficiency of implementation, the third criteria, yes, you will need to have a plan, how you plan to structure the project, work packages, milestones, deliverables, everything practical, how you plan to organize your personnel effort and so on, will be in this part of the proposal. And you will need to give us some information about who are the participants in your consortium and how do they bring together the expertise to run the project. The standard evaluation process is also used for PCP and PPI actions. So proposals are evaluated by external experts, first individually, then in group. They decide in a panel about the ranking, and that's how the final list is decided, which proposals will get funded. Normally, PCP and PPI actions have one-stage evaluations, so you only have to submit one proposal, not two. And they will be ranked according to criteria, 3 criteria that all have the same value. They all are scored out of 5 points, maximum 5 points you can get on each criterion. So the total is maximum 15. And in order to pass, you need to have minimum 10 in total. When can I start my project? If you submit a proposal just before the submission deadline, of course, it still needs to go through all this evaluation process, and typically around 8 months after the proposal deadline, projects are really starting their project. Key principles, we will immediately go over them in detail, one by one. Of course, your work needs to fit a topic in the work program. You need to show that your idea is ambitious, that you are really going for excellent new innovation procurements that will deliver higher impacts than what's possible with solutions that exist today on the market. Some specific principles that we already and rules that we already addressed will need to be respected. Okay, and you will need to explain us also how you are going to get to these impacts and outcomes, and demonstrate how your work plan and resources and participants will be all brought together to achieve the goals. So in the application form, you will see that it follows exactly the 3 evaluation criteria, and it is asking you to fill in section by section all the information that is needed for the evaluators to score these points. So don't forget to fill in one section or another, because then we won't be able, the evaluators won't be able to evaluate that part. The evaluation criteria have been simplified, so also the application form has been simplified. Under the first criteria, excellence, for example, you will need to explain what is the objective of your procurement, what is the procurement need that it tries to address, how is this now innovative compared to what exists today on the market, but also the methodology. How do you plan to organize your procurements? Who will be in your buyers group? Who will be the lead procurer? How long do you think your procurement should last? What budget should it have? How will you evaluate offers yourself or using external experts? How will you do the monitoring of the suppliers? Will all the procurers do that, or somebody takes charge of that? Will testing happen in all countries, only in some countries, and so on? And then, of course, depending whether you go for a PCP or a PPI project, you need to explain a bit what is your first view on organizing this procurement. Will you go for a two-phase PCP or a three-phases approach? How many suppliers do you think you need to have a good amount of competition? Will you be buying the ultimate solutions already or not? In case of PPIs, will you go for a joint procurement or several separate coordinated ones? Who is going to be buying what and how much and by when? So a bit of the specifics so that the evaluators can understand what are you actually planning to buy. And then of course explain also how you will organize the other activities in the project, preparing the procurement, the market consultation, developing the tender specs, the evaluation criteria, but also running the procurement and doing any validation and dissemination activities afterwards. Regarding impact, there is a new concept in the Horizon Europe to describe the project pathways to impact. So in the work program, you will see that each topic is asking the topics to address certain expected outcomes, and the destination under which the topic is put also is asking to address certain wider impacts, for example, on climate change and so on. So you will need to see that your section about impact in the proposal is addressing both of these expected outcomes and wider impacts. And that you explain also a bit what could be the potential barriers or factors from outside the project that could influence how well your project will be able to reach all these impacts. Scale and significance is also something new that is being asked. Scale is, for example, do you expect your project to affect 3 countries, 5 countries, the whole of Europe, thousands of users, 10,000s of users? And yeah, significance is more inside an area itself. How significant will the impact be on that specific area or user group? Then you will have a section about what kind of measures do you want to mobilize exactly to achieve this impact? What kind of dissemination activities, exploitation activities, communication activities? Important in procurement projects is to start from the beginning. Measures to ensure that industry, you will reach wide industry interest in your procurement. You will publish widely the open market consultation, promote the call for tender and so on, so that you get lots of interest from industry. And also at the end of the project and during the project, you will communicate about the results that the procurement achieved so that other buyers, you can encourage them to also get interested to deploy the solutions. And this can help also other suppliers grow their business. Other activities like standardization, certification may also help maximizing impact. Important is also in this section, you will have a part about how do you plan to manage IPR. Remember that we said that there's specific IPR approach for procurement projects in Horizon Europe, so make sure that you are compliant with that. And if there are any project specificities that you want to add to the IPR approach, for example, I want my project to be done by 5 procurers, but I want to add another 10 procurers as associated partners so that they can piggyback on my procurement, they can use the results later. This kind of project specificities would be good to already explain a bit in your proposal, because they might have increase the impact of the project. Implementation is the next evaluation criteria. You will be asked to come with a work plan. How do you plan to structure the work? What kind of work packages, types of activities do you plan to do? Make sure you have a work package for preparing the procurement and one for executing and following it up. And make sure that you also foresee there in the deliverables and milestones, the mandatory deliverables and milestones that are required by the work program for PCP and PPI actions. For example, for the publication of all the notices, for preparing the call for tender documents, for publishing some of the results at the end of the procurement, and so on. There are also templates for all that. You find them in the application form. Ensure sufficient time in the planning, the time planning of your project to do all this, because many projects are a bit over ambitious in the beginning and then they run into time delays during the project. Better to foresee sufficient time from the beginning for all these activities. And the last chapter is about risks and mitigation measures, where you can think about critical risks that might affect my project and what will I do about them if they might happen. Finally, there's also a section about resources. How will your consortium mobilize resources for the project? And you will see a number of tables there that you will be asked to fill in. There is one specific table for informing us about how do you plan to spend the PCP PPI procurement costs. So how much budget do you need for actually procuring your R&D or innovative solutions, and how this will this budget be put together? How will the different procurers in the buyers group contribute to create this total budget? And then the other cost categories there are for the additional activities, not for the procurement cost. Of course, you will need personnel costs to run the project. You might need to subcontract some activities, experts to help you. You may need to purchase some computers or other equipment to do testing. Other direct costs, for example, for travel, in-kind contributions, if you need that in your project. And the last section under criterion 3 is capacity of participants and the consortium as a whole. So here you will be asked to explain how the different partners in your project are able to do all this work together. What is their role in doing the project and how are they complementary to do it together? If there are other countries, third countries or international organizations involved in your project, that's also where you should explain that. Biggest question in PCP PPI projects is always, how do I fill in this budget table? Where do I put this procurement cost? So let's take an example of a pre-commercial procurement action. For example, the work program calls for a 10 million euro pre-commercial procurement action, and you submit a proposal where you want to use 1 million euro for additional activities and 9 million euro for the actual procurement cost, just as an example. How do you fill them in the budget table? Suppose that you have a buyers group of 3 procurers and each are contributing with the same weight equally to this procurement budget. First possibility is that all procurers will be asking funding for the procurement cost from Horizon Europe. That's the easiest scenario, but still then there are 2 sub-possibilities. One is that the lead procurer says, I will pay all the suppliers. It's the easiest to coordinate that. Most of the projects are doing that. Second option is that the 3 procurers say, no, we will each pay all the suppliers pro rata, 1/3 in fact of each invoice that they will send for the procurement. It's a possibility. And the second scenario is that some procurers, only procurer 1 and 2 has asked funding from Horizon Europe, but the third procurer says, I want to ask funding from the European structural funds, for example, for my contribution to the procurement budget. If that's the case, then this project will have to use option 2, where each procurer is paying pro rata the vendors, because otherwise it's not possible anymore to track which cost invoice is referring to which program it's referring to. So let's see the first scenario. So all procurers are asking budget only from Horizon Europe for their procurement cost. It's a PCP action. We said we want to spend 9 million euro in this project. Where do we put this 9 million euro now? Well, here you see the budget table, the part of the budget table for other costs, and there is a specific other cost category there, D5 PCP PPI procurement cost. That's where you put the budget you want to spend all together in the project on this, in this case, PCP procurement. If the lead procurer, procurer 1, is the one who's going to pay all the suppliers, you put the 9 million euro with the lead procurer. In the second case, where the 3 procurers want to pay pro rata each 1/3 of the procurement budget, then you spread it 3 million each across these 3 procurers. In the total budget table, you will fill this in the column D again in red, you see it there. And now you see also the other costs appearing for the additional activities in the categories A, B, and C, personnel costs, subcontracting, and other purchasing costs for travel, for example. In this simple example, there are only personnel costs, but you will see that now we will see how on the personnel costs, there are, for example, also indirect costs calculated in column E, while this is not happening on the procurement cost that is in column D. So just take a look at it at ease at home to see the difference, but the important thing is that you see the difference between scenario 1 and 2 or pro rata by each procurer in the buyers group. And then you will see also how this is filled in the table 3.1f in the proposal, because in the budget table, we only saw in case the first scenario is used where the lead procurer is paying everything, that 9 million euro is spent on the procurement, but we don't see where this 9 million euro is coming from. And here in this budget table, you see that this 9 million euro is actually divided across the 3 procurers equally. In the first column, you see that. In the second column, you see that the procurers are not bringing 0 million euro there, any additional budget from their own resources to the procurement. It's possible to do that in case you want to add even additional budget above what Horizon is bringing. You fill it in there then in the green column. If you have additional budget from other programs like SF, this would be in the blue column. But we are looking here at the scenario where there is no additional budget from SIF program. All procurers are only asking co-financing from Horizon Europe. So this column is also 0 million. And everything adds up to 9 million in total. What happens if there is now a procurer that says, for example, procurer 3, I don't want money from Horizon Europe, I'll get it from another program like the structural funds. Then in the Horizon Europe budget table here, this procurer fills in 0 euro because he's not asking any money from Horizon Europe under the D5 column. And the whole 9 million euro is either put again with the lead procurer or spread over the first 2 procurers, each 4.5 million in this case then. In the total budget table, this column appears again and the other costs are added, personnel costs and so on. And the project total cost is calculated by the system. What is now the difference in the table 3.1f? You see the red first column shows only money for the 2 first procurers that are asking budget from Horizon Europe. Nobody is adding in the green column budget of its own procurement budget. But in the blue column, you see that the 3rd procurer is adding budget for the procurement cost from the structural funds program. And in the end, the total result is that the total procurement budget is higher. Of course, it's not the 9 million only that comes from Horizon Europe, but it's also the extra 4.5 million that now comes from the other program that is added to the total procurement budget. So you can increase a procurement budget by adding budget from other programs. In case this was a PPI project, there would be, of course, also in the funding rate would not be 100%, and there would be then also a contribution. Half of the procurement cost in the green column would then have to come also from the procurers themselves. But this is a PCP example where the funding is 100%, so here it's not strictly required. If you want to do a PCP or PPI inside an R&I action, you see that the situation is different, because then there is no specific column D5 for PCP PPI procurement costs in R&I actions. In R&I actions, the price of the procurement, PCPPI procurement, is put on the column B together with all the other subcontracting costs. So you fill in the column the same way as if you would have filled it in for a PCPPI action, but you put it in another column. You put it under column B instead of column D. But for the rest, the calculation is similar. One final point, if you want to learn how an evaluation works, you can also learn it firsthand by becoming an evaluator. So you can register yourself on the portal to become an evaluator and help us evaluate projects. Now we are at the last slide. We really need to start looking at the question and answers. Thank you for your attention to all these presentations. Let's look at the question and answers now. So Olivier, could you show the question and answers on the screen? Thanks a lot. Okay, one question is clearly, where can I find all the financed innovation procurement projects under Horizon 2020 in a centralized place? Yes, indeed. Yeah. We have an overview of all the projects that have been financed, not only under Horizon 2020, but also even under the FP7 program on our website. The link is in some of the slides, but we can post it to you again. If you Google on the internet, digital single market, it's on the website of DG CNECT, the digital single market website. And you put EU-funded PCP PPI projects, you will get there. But we can include the link later in the Q&A. But there is a place where you can see all the previously funded and ongoing projects and who is participating in all those projects also. Next question, how do I find the right investors to fund the startup? Yes, a very good question, but not so easy to answer. It's not actually a procurement question, but procurement can help in this. Some public procurement projects, they use investors already as evaluators to evaluate the offers that they get for their procurement. And then, of course, there is an immediate link with possible investors for startups. But typically in innovation procurements, startups find their investors the same way as they do if they were not in an innovation procurement project. They can go to local startup support organizations in their country, in their region. There is also at European level, the European Innovation Council, where you can apply for support as a startup. And some work programs have specific actions also. They're funding specific actions that are helping startups in a specific area, for example, in robotics or of artificial intelligence, to help them find funding. So there is no clear-cut answer. There are several avenues to find investors, but procurers are one of the potential investors also. So if you are a startup, please do try to apply for innovation procurement projects. They have already helped a lot of startups grow their business. Next question, having first CSAs, does this mean that the following PCP project must have the same partners, or can it be different partners? It's a different project, so it can be different partners. Of course, it will be logical that the partners who were in the coordination and support action will logically be interested also to participate in the following PCP or PPI project that results from that. But it's not mandatory that all the partners that were in the CSA, for example, also participate in the procurement later. There can be partners that don't participate anymore, or there can be also new procurers that join the procurement projects that were not in the CSA. How can the rule of the first 20 buyers on the market be verified? Yes, is it worldwide? Yeah, really good question. So when we did the study to benchmark how many innovation procurement investments are happening in Europe, we had to find a way to deal with this problem, because innovation procurements were those that were the first 20 buyers on the market. So per innovation that we were looking at, for example, I don't know, disinfection robots for hospitals, for example, we looked at how widely are these solutions already deployed, or light emitting diodes and LED lamps for houses or for public buildings. How widely are these already deployed? How do you find this information? There are lots of reports from consultants that follow the market, that publish how widely certain new innovations have already been taken up in the market. So it's by looking for information on the internet from market research that this information is being obtained. And of course, the experts who are evaluating the projects, they are experts, so they know their domain and they have an idea about whether an innovation is still in early adoption or whether it's already in mass market deployment or not. And the 20% buyers on the market is indeed the market for that innovation. So if the market for that innovation is worldwide, then it is the worldwide market. Correct. Next question is asking, in a PCP PPI project, can a group of buyers acquire R&D services from high income countries that are outside of Europe, that are not associated countries? Yeah, so first of all, there may be a difference between the PCP and the PPI projects. So the PCP projects, like we said, they are not falling under the international procurement rules. And because of that, we are using some techniques to make sure that they will deliver benefits from Europe and create growth and jobs in Europe. And one of these techniques that we use, that we require each PCP project to do, is to require that the majority of the R&D activities that are being procured are being performed in Europe. And Europe is then the member states and associated countries, unless it is a project where, for example, exceptional project like for security reasons, where it needs to be restricted to member states only, but normally it's member states and associated countries. If it means that the majority of the R&D services needs to be done in Europe, it doesn't mean that all the R&D services need to be done in Europe. Yeah, if the project, for example, in the European blockchain pre-commercial procurement that the Commission did, we required that 70% of all the R&D activities were performed in the member states or associated countries, and that for the security components, 100% of the activities were done in the member states. So there can be even a mix of several conditions, but it's highly exceptional that everything will be required to be done in Europe, so that there is still some possibility for vendors to find some cooperation with other providers outside of Europe if they're not able, for example, to do certain activities in Europe. We showed you the results of past funded projects where we have also used this rule, asking minimum 50% of activities to be done in Europe, and in reality 7% was done in Europe. So most of the activities will be typically done in Europe, but it's not an absolute requirement. In PPI projects, it's different, because there typically these procurements are not exempted from international procurement rules, are not exempted from the treaty, not exempted from the European procurement directives. So we cannot just put any kind of wild requirements that we want. We have to be more careful about putting requirements. Sometimes it is possible to put requirements, place of performance requirements, but typically not as as far going as in pre-commercial procurements, because they have to respect non-discrimination rules in these international procurement agreements. It's one of the reasons why we do pre-commercial procurements, clearly to build capacity in Europe before the large deployment contracts will come. Also requirements that I mentioned where after the project we require a certain amount of commercialization to be done in Europe, are easy to apply in pre-commercial procurements, but are not as easy to apply, normally not possible to apply in PPI procurements because of these non-discrimination rules. Also the requirements that highly sensitive strategic components of projects need to be sourced from Europe can normally only be applied in procurements that are exempt from international procurement agreements. So we can use them in PCPs, no problem. But in PPIs, again, we need to be more careful. No problem in security projects, for example, that are under the security exemption. But in other projects, it's more difficult, and it needs to be investigated on a case-by-case basis. Okay, next question. Is green procurement assimilated to PPI? Yes. Are we sure that green procurement requirements will determine the PPI? Yeah. What can we say about that? Well, green procurement is a specific way of procuring, right? Depends what you mean by green procurement, but in general, let me start with that. The Horizon Europe program is trying to, in many ways, to contribute to the Green Deal, to make sure that when we do a project, we will do no harm to the environment. We will do it in the most green way that is feasible. And if we do procurement projects, PCPs and PPIs, there may be topics that specifically ask you to use green procurement techniques, like, for example, the green public procurement criteria or other green procurement techniques. But there may be other topics that don't specifically require it. But as you have seen in the evaluation criteria, we are paying attention in the evaluation criteria to the do no significant harm principle. So it's always beneficial in your project proposal if you are looking for green procurement anyway, because you are mentioning rightfully that in many national programs, green procurement is a priority and it needs to be done anyway, even in innovation procurements. If you mention this in your proposal, it's always an added value because all evaluations are looking for those type of projects that do the least harm to the environment, let's say. I hope this answers this question. The next one. Yes, indeed. I forgot to say that some of the documents that I have links to in my slides are not available yet, like the annotated model grant agreement is not available yet, or the program guide. True. Yeah, and when you click on those links, you will see this will be available soon. And what is soon? Yep, I can't tell you the answer in how many days it will still take, but soon is soon. We have worked on it. We're trying to finalize it and publish it as soon as possible. I know that for the calls that are currently open, you want to have this information as soon as possible. So we will also try to publish it really as soon as possible, but I don't have a specific date that I can tell you yet. I'm sorry. Next question, may a potential supplier be part of a PCP-PPI proposal with the aim to give technical support, for example, for specific technologies? No, like we mentioned in the slides, potential suppliers for solutions for the PCP or PPI procurement cannot be part of a PCP-PPI proposal under Horizon Europe. Of course, they will be involved, but they will not be in the proposal. What happens that when the participants in the proposal start their project, they will involve the supply side right away from the beginning but not just one or two specific suppliers that are in their project. No, they will be involving all suppliers, all potential suppliers on the market by doing an open market consultation. So they will go to the whole industry, to all researchers, explaining this is the procurement that we want to do, this is what we want to achieve, what is technologically feasible, what are the technologies able to do. You will be able to provide not only public information, but also confidential information in a confidential way to these public buyers, so that you don't need to make public any confidential information about your solutions. But it will be all done in an open, transparent way to involve the whole market. And the same will happen when the procurement is launched. Also, the procurement will be launched, and basically everybody will be able to make offers. Next question, what is considered innovative in a PPI? Yes, I didn't go into detail, but there is a definition about what we consider an innovative solution in the work program, in the general Annex H of the work program. And this one is already available on the funding and tenders portal. So I would really recommend you to go through this one if you're interested in a project. So it explains that innovative solutions are not just solutions that are totally new to the market, never deployed before. That's of course one possible situation, but it can also be solutions that are already deployed in small quantity on the market, but just not widely yet. Not more than 20% customers on the market have deployed it yet. Can be also new combinations of existing solutions. So there's an explanation of what means an innovative solution in the PPI context. Okay, next question. What budget limitations are foreseen to subcontract additional activities? Yes, how is this evaluated? Okay, so the model grant agreement, not the annotated one, which is not available yet, but the model grant agreement itself is already available on the portal. And you see there that when it's not about the PCP PPI cost, not the price for buying the innovations or the R&D, but for subcontracting other types of support activities for the project, you will see that the model grant agreement says that subcontracting for this type of activities needs to be limited in a project, because the purpose is that beneficiaries themselves do as much as possible the activities, and subcontracting is limited. They try to put all the expertise that they need in as much as possible in the consortium, but still subcontracting is possible for this type of tasks. What budget limitation is there? There is no, well, there is one absolute budget limitation in PCP PPI actions, because the PCP PPI procurement cost itself needs to be minimum 50% of the action. So it means that all the other activities, the personnel cost of the buyers themselves and any additional subcontracting they want to do, needs to be smaller than 50%. But how much is done by the buyers themselves, how much is subcontracted, it's there is no absolute number for that defined in the model grant agreement. How it is evaluated, there is a table. One of these tables under the third evaluation criteria is specifically for listing subcontracting costs. So you will fill in this table which kind of activities you want to subcontract, a bit of description, legal support, and so on, and the budget that you think is needed for that. So this is how it's evaluated at the proposal stage. We are looking at what do you want to use the subcontracting for, and how much money, is it reasonable, the amount of money that you want to spend on that? Is it justified? I hope this helps. Ooh, can European agencies act as community linkers to assist PCP and PPI actions? Yeah, it depends what you mean by community linkers. Of course, European agencies can promote PCP and PPI calls if they have a certain community that is already involved in projects or in activities working for the agency. They can, of course, encourage this community to participate, so they can make promotion for the open market consultations or the call for tenders. We are already doing that. In fact, for example, when under Horizon 2020, PCP or PPI calls are published or open market consultations are published, our colleagues from the EIC are promoting these via social media and their emails and so on to the startups and SMEs in the EIC program. So I think this is a good idea, and it could be done much more even with other agencies. We could try to set up such a cooperation. So if this is what your question means, then yeah, very good idea, and we should do it more. Finding partners, next question. Is there a link with partner search opportunities? Yes, like we said, under each topic, there is a bullet. If you go to the topic page on the portal, there is a bullet, find new partners or express your interest as a partner. So you can fill in there that you are looking for other partners to form a proposal for this topic. And there is also a specific page, I think, on the portal for partner search opportunities, where you can also, for these kind of topics, for PCPs and PPIs, do a partner search. You can even do a partner search there, I think, in the past projects, if I'm not wrong, from Horizon 2020 program. If that still works, I think that still works. So that should be possible, yes. Okay, next question. What can be procured within the PCP contract? Yes, the prototyped solution or the final solution. And you define this difference: research and testing based agreement or commercial agreement. Yeah, this depends a bit on how you define what you want to buy in the pre-commercial procurement. A pre-commercial procurement is by definition a research and development type contract. And in this research and development type contract, you can specify that at the end, you know, the procurers are the boss, they define what they want to test. They can specify that, I don't know, in each country at least 2 solutions should be tested, or in at least in each country in the project 2000 solutions should be tested. It can be small or large testing that they want to do, small or large piloting. In any case, testing remains testing. And all these solutions that are tested can be procured during the pre-commercial procurement, as long as the amount of money, the value that goes to buying these final tested solutions, does not end up being more than 50% of the total value of the PCP contract that you have with the vendor. Why is that? Because pre-commercial procurement is, by definition, the way it is put in the procurement rules, a research and development services contract. The exemption from all the procurement rules is only there if it concerns a services contract and if it concerns a research and development contract. So the services aspect means that the majority of the money needs to be spent on services, on researching, developing, creating, testing the solutions, not on the supplies that are being procured within this procurement. So as long as you procure less than 50% of the pre-commercial procurement contract budget on supplies, the contract remains a services contract and it's fine. It cannot become more than half of the procurement budget, the amount of tested solutions that you want to buy. That's the legal limitation, let's say, this 50% value. In any case, we didn't discuss this, but it's also clearly explained in the work program, in the general annexes, H in particular. Suppose you are not ready yet to define from the beginning in your pre-commercial procurement contract how many final solutions you would want to buy. It's logical because they're not even developed and tested yet. Most procurers are not able at that stage to define yet how much they would want to buy and at which price and so on. So suppose you don't want to buy any resulting solution during the pre-commercial procurement, you can still buy them afterwards by using the article in the procurement directives, the negotiated procedure without publication for buying supplies that were manufactured for research and development purposes. So because the PCP contract was a research and development contract, you can afterwards buy the resulting supplies that were created in the PCP also separately through a separate contract, which you don't need to publish because it's a negotiated procedure without publication. And so you could buy the supplies still from the vendors that were in the PCP in this way also, even if you don't buy it within the PCP procurement contract. But then it will, of course, not be funded by the PCP project from Horizon Europe. Then it will be a different procurement afterwards. Next question. We are now 17 past 3. We can take a couple of more, but at 3:30, I think we should stop the webinar for practical reasons. In any case, if we haven't answered all questions, then we can still answer them in writing. Yeah? But let's take a couple of more. We're not 3:30 yet. Okay, new question here arriving at the top. Through a PCP, what if I am an innovation agency? Can I launch then the R&D channel and decide afterwards to engage local and interested procurers based on the results, if any? No, this isn't possible, because in the work program we say that the buyers group needs to have procurers that are the potential customers, the potential end users of the innovation. So we cannot just use the PCPs to launch an R&D challenge to see if somebody could develop something and then afterwards look for potential clients of these solutions. The potential clients should be already in the buyers group in the proposal. Why is this? It's to make sure that the requirements, because to launch a pre-commercial procurement, you will have to put requirements. What should the solutions actually be able to do? That these requirements are really defined by potential buyers, that these requirements really present a procurement need, or at least if it's not an immediate procurement need, the strategy of these procurements, their innovation plans, their ambitions to improve the quality and efficiency of their public services or to address a specific societal challenge. So you need to have some potential buyers or ministries responsible for the strategy in that domain. Could be, for example, potential buyers in the health domain, actual hospitals, and the Ministry of Health, for example, as procurers in a buyers group. Next question, can an innovation agency act as a broker, launching the challenge and supporting the matching between the supply and the demand side? An innovation agency can be, for example, the lead procurer, if that's what you're asking in a project. So it can coordinate the open market consultations, the cooperation between the procurers, launch even the procurement, but there needs to be a buyers group of actual potential customers, like we said, in the project. And then support the matching between the demand and the supply sides. Well, the open market consultations and the call for tenders are published normally for all PCP and PPI procurements. So any company, researcher from all over Europe and the associated countries can always, if he's interested, participate in the open market consultations, in submitting a tender, in the procurement if he's selected. But of course, just publishing these notices is typically not enough. You need to promote this a bit also, or you need to promote it a lot to the potential interested communities. So if you mean by brokering that somebody like an innovation agency could be in the project to do this kind of promotion activities to potential potential suppliers, potential researchers about what are the innovation needs of the procurers, that they are about to launch an open market consultation or a call for tender, then yes, for sure, innovation agencies and also other types of support organizations, like competence centers or chambers of commerce, enterprise, startup organizations can also do this type of activities. Anybody who can promote the activities that the procurers are doing to the potential supply side is welcome to help, of course. Is the PCP flexible enough for this? Well, yes, anybody can participate in the project, like we said. Even supporting organizations can be beneficiaries as long as they're not the suppliers themselves. So yes, I would say that both the PCP and PPI projects are flexible for that. Okay, next question. In case additional contribution for PPI, is provided from the buyer's own resources, the 50% funds for additional activities can be proportionally increased. Now, this is a difficult to understand question. How does it work? Proposers will submit a proposal saying, for example, there is a call saying there is maximum 10 million euro for this topic for a PPI, for example, project like you mentioned, maximum 10 million euro. Somebody submits a proposal. He says, I don't want 10 million euro. I want 9 million euro. Okay, as an example, it's possible. And then he can ask, he needs to ask maximum 4.5 million euro of this project to be spent on the PPI procurement, and the other 4.5 million euro, which is huge, can be maximum used for additional activities. And all of it, both the additional activities and the procurement cost, will be funded at 50%. So whatever amounts you request in the proposal as eligible costs, if they're eligible, they will be funded at 50%. So I don't really understand what you mean by proportional increase, because nothing is being increased. In the proposal, you ask for a certain amount of costs to be funded, and all of them will be funded at the same funding rate, 50%. Maybe you mean that once a project is up and running, and then all of a sudden, maybe one of the procurers finds additional budget somewhere from its own resources to invest more in the PPI procurement than he had initially foreseen. Can the project then also get additional money from the European Commission for the additional activities? Well, the question is, if you have asked in the beginning in response to a call for a 9 million euro budgeted project and you were awarded this project, you cannot during the project ask for more money and ask for another 500 million euro or so. Once the project is started, the maximum budget of the project is frozen. And all costs that will be implemented in the project will also always be funded at 50%. Now, if from the beginning, I understand now the question, I think, in your 9 million euro proposal, you didn't ask for a lot of money for additional activities. You, for example, in the 9 million euro, asked for I don't know, 500,000 euro for additional activities, and you need more. Can you get this money then from the budget that you asked originally for the procurement cost? Well, as long as the procurement costs, the budget that is spent on procuring is still minimum 50% of the project budget, because that's the requirement for PCP and PPI actions, that minimum 50% of the procurement budget goes to the procurement. Okay, but this is now very specific. It's probably better to look at this when we have practical cases, but as long as the rule is respected that minimum 50% of the budget goes to procurement, there might be possibility to, during the project, shift some additional budget to additional activities, yes. Yeah, what is the effective release date in the next question of the call? Update of the material system analysis of cluster 4. Yes, there are some calls where the call dates are still indicative, They are not exactly defined yet, because there are some topics, not only this one, but also the one on space, I think, where the exact goal dates still need to be defined with the member states, because some of the calls in the work program are sensitive in terms of how open should they be to third countries, and the decision has not been fully taken yet for all the calls. So for calls that have some sensitive topics, it might be that you see that the call date is still indicative and not exactly defined yet. So then we'll have to check the tenders portal regularly to see when it is updated. Normally we expect this to be updated after the summer. Okay, last question that we tackle, and then we should close the webinar and answer any other Q&A in writing, because we will pass our deadline.
This is the last question, actually.
Yeah, this is the last question now. Okay, it is also the last one. Perfect. Can a developer have 100% of its R&D costs covered by a procurer through PCP, or does it have to pay part of the development cost itself? Yeah, good question. Yes, a public procurement is not a grant. In a grant, you may know that better maybe. At least in the European grants, it works with funding rates, and as a supplier, if you apply for a grant, you always get only a certain portion of your development cost reimbursed, for example, 70% or 50%, if that's the funding rate for a research or innovation action on a specific goal. But procurements are something different. They are not grants that give a certain, reimburse a certain percentage of costs. They are buying something, like you are buying bread in the supermarket or a car in a car shop. And when you buy something, you pay that at market price. So you pay the full price of whatever this thing costs, the car that you want to buy or the bread that you want to buy. So procurements are buying things at commercial rates. And what is the commercial rate? Well, it's determined by the suppliers that will make offers. As a procurer will say, hey, I'm launching a procurement with this budget, for example, 5 million euro. That's the maximum amount of money that I have. I don't have more. And then suppliers will make offers. And they will say, I'm willing to do the project at 4.5 million. Another one, I'm willing to do it at 4.8 million. And the best one in terms of price and quality that will be selected, he will win the contract at his price that he has mentioned in his offer. So how much of your costs will you get actually covered depends on the offer that you make as a supplier. You can make as a supplier an offer that covers all your costs, or you can say, oh, damn, I'm really interested in that procurement. I'm going to give really an extra price reduction to do my best to make it even more attractive so that I'm definitely selected. And I'm actually not covering all my costs in my offer. Then, of course, if you file in the contract, yeah, you will only get the price paid that you have put in your offer. So how much you will be reimbursed, actually not reimbursed, but financed in a procurement depends on the offer itself that the supplier makes, but it is allowed to cover 100% of the cost if this is what you submit in your offer and you are selected with this price to perform the contract. I hope this answers your question. We have finished now all the questions and should close the webinar. Thanks a lot for all your comments, questions, and participation. If you have more comments in the future, don't hesitate to contact us, or don't hesitate to use the Q&A functionality on the funding and tenders portal itself. In each topic has a Q&A button where you can submit questions. Thanks a lot, and see you in the future in one of our other activities or webinars. Have a nice afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.